Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Seize Your Business. Today's topic is insurance, what I'm covered for or not covered for. And our guest is Tom Restko from Insurance Crow Group. Hi, Tom. Welcome.
Tim,
Good to see you.
my pleasure.
So, Tom, a lot of our audience is, newer businesses just getting developed. And what are some of the starting points for insurance concerns that they may have?
Well, in any business, the first and foremost concern usually is having general liability. General liability is slip and fall hazards, product liability, that kind of thing. And then you also want either property coverage of some sort. Could be building, could be your equipment, could be your contents, in a place. And we combine those for what is called either a business owner's package or what we call a special multi-peril policy. Those are kind of terms that really mean the same thing. They're packaging the property coverages and the liability coverage to give something that has more value together for the client. Besides that, you would want a workman's comp policy. And you and I had a conversation before about this, but so many people nowadays are being told, and excuse me, but erroneously, that they should not cover themselves for workman's comp. Yes, there's a savings, but let me give you an example, if you will. Let's say that you're a single consultant of some sort, could be an attorney, an accountant, an insurance broker, any kind of consultant, and you're working on your own, and you're told that as an owner of a sole proprietorship, a partner of a partnership, an executive officer of a corporation, any type of corporation, and that also includes an LLC because they are like corporate officers. So in all those cases, in Illinois, as well as a lot of states, you do not have to insure yourself, and you can decline the coverage for yourself. Now, if you're a consultant, one of the professions that I mentioned, your workman's comp rate per 100 is probably a clerical rate, which is in the 20 cents to 30 cents per $100 of annual payroll. So if you're already covering your employees, to add yourself to that policy may be as low as $150 a year. Okay. If you buy a policy just for yourself, then there's some fees that are attached to that, and now you might pay $350 for that policy. But if you look at your personal, or even if it's a business health insurance policy, you have a deductible that is probably nowadays $2,000, $6,000, $10,000, or $20,000. And then you still have a network that you are restricted to, and other rules that the companies are putting onto these policies for you. So for either that $150, if you already have employees, to add you, or even if it's $350, why would you want to take the risk for 10 hours a day, or if you're like me, you're working 24 hours a day at what you do? And there's an argument there, of course, but to get that 100% coverage of the medical without any restrictions, without any networks, that's only one part of it. You still have disability income as part of the law, which is 66 2/3% of what you normally make while you're off because of this covered injury. And then there's the indemnity side that the law allows for things like a loss of a finger, a loss of eyesight, loss of hearing. All these things for that amount of money, it's crazy not to cover yourself. Okay.
You know, you mentioned workers' comp, and that brings me to a question I want to ask you. You know, there's a lot of early stage businesses will sometimes bring in employees, but they'll call them contractors and pay them on a 1099. Do those people then still need workers' comp? Or
am I glad you brought that up?
Thank you. That's why I'm here to ask good questions.
A 1099 employee or a W-2 employee, there's not a lot of difference when the IRS looks at it or when an insurance company looks at it, because there's a lot of different tests. Do you tell them what to do? Do you tell them when to show up? Do you tell them when to go home? I mean, if any of these are true, then it kind of changes the dynamic, and you're considered like a general contractor with a subcontractor. If the subcontractor doesn't have coverage, the contractor must have the coverage. Okay? If the subcontractor has coverage, then you're not charged on that employee.
Okay.
So you must get a certificate of insurance to prove that that employee, that 1099 employee, has their own workman's comp coverage. If not, guess who's going to be probably the one holding the bag?
The employer. Right?
Yes.
Right. So I think that's, you know, I often hear that people, you know, believe they're being clever using 1099s, but they're taking on not only that liability, but also liability for income tax if the contractor is not properly filing, because they can be deemed to be employees.
Yeah, more in your side than my side, because I don't even look at that in what I do. But it's a very good point, and I'm glad you brought that.
So, next question. You know, a lot of people, you know, they start in business and, you know, get a little bit down the road, they need insurance, and they call their local, you know, life and health, they're either homeowner's guy, you know, State Farm, Allstate, or whatever. Is that a good way to go, or are there risks in doing that?
I'll give you an example that came probably about 20 years ago. Of course, I'm not going to tell you who it was. I can say it was a doctor, okay, and he had a surgical business, okay, and he wanted me to look at the building insurance and things like that. And I mentioned, well, why don't you show me your malpractice? Because I'm somewhat of, well, not somewhat, I am an expert on malpractice insurance. And he says, well, that's such a good premium. I used to be with another guy, and I went with this new guy, and he gave me a premium that is just impossible to beat. Now, right away, I'm thinking, well, malpractice.
Wrong with this picture.
Right. Because, first of all, malpractice is horrible. I feel sorry for doctors, quite honestly. And then, not to mention all the restrictions on that policy as well. But it was a scary situation, so I asked to see the policy. On a liability policy, you and I have had conversations before. There's two types of triggers for paying a claim. You can have an occurrence policy, similar to your homeowners or car insurance, your general liability office package. Those are on an occurrence form, which means that if you get sued for something that happened 2 years ago, they're going to go back to that policy you had in force 2 years ago, and that's the policy that's triggered and is going to hopefully pay for the claim when you get it. Now, on a malpractice or an errors and omissions or professional liability policy, those are usually written on what is called a claims made form. And in that policy format, it's a little different. When you first start in business, they're covering that first year on a claims made policy. And that start of business is what is called your retroactive date. So now when you go to the second year, that retroactive date stays the same, but the policy is actually covering 2 years now because that first policy is gone. There's no coverage on that anymore.
Right.
So now the second policy must keep this date and now cover 2 years, and then 3 years. And notice I'm staying right where it is, 4 years.
Right.
Then it's considered a mature policy after 4 years. Well, if the agent, when they come in to quote the insurance, doesn't know this policy and how it works, offers the doctor this policy that starts fresh, not back here, no retroactive date, it starts now.
Mm-hmm.
The doctor looked at it like a premium that was made in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And took this, not realizing that now he lost all of this time frame for what he can get sued for with no coverage at all.
Right.
Okay. Right. He would have to buy a tail, which would be more costly than him buying that one policy, because he'd still have to cover this for any length of years.
So if and a broker was either not up to speed or unscrupulous, they could save the doctor money by creating gaps in his coverage that he doesn't know are there.
And I'm hoping to say that I really haven't found too many people that I consider unscrupulous.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that would be the case.
Okay.
But when it comes to being in business, and when it comes to insuring your business properly,
mm-hmm.
you don't want to just rely on somebody that's doing your car and home insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And there are ways to make sure that your agent is somewhat seasoned. Letters after a name, they mean something.
Mm-hmm.
I myself have had a certified insurance consultant designation, CIC designation, since 1986. And to have that, I have to do 20 to 25 hours of continuing education every single year. And I've done that, but actually I usually go double that each year.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe in education. I'm also a teacher now, as you know. I'm also a speaker on insurance matters. And you have to be better at it than your audience, because otherwise, why are you there in the first place?
Right.
So I'm not the only one that knows some of these things. There are others out there, but I would definitely, when it comes to business insurance, I would either be with one of the larger agencies that are out there, but you don't have to be, because I always think that you lose some of the service with these large agencies.
Sure.
But you can get somebody that's like me with a designation that you are the most important person in the world to that agent.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as they keep up, they will do a good job for you.
Unfortunately, our society has gotten so complicated. But I remember years ago I was CFO at a company, and I would buy all the insurance. And our broker once took us to a workshop on insurance coverage. And as we're going through all these exceptions and exclusions, and I concluded eventually that they could simplify the whole thing by just adding one clause. There is no coverage under this insurance. And obviously I'm being facetious, but that just shows you how complicated it is.
They are very complicated. In fact, there's conditions to the policy that can act as an exclusion. There's exclusions themselves that are on the policy. Mm-hmm. Actually, exclusions are on policies for 3 reasons. Number one, the insurance company either wants more money for it, so you can buy it back. Number two, they can't cover it because it's just too costly. For instance, there could be a war, or there can be a nuclear reaction, and everybody's gone in the area.
Yeah.
An insurance company would never be able to field a claim like that, because number one, it's concentrated. Number two, it's such a wide area that it's impossible to insure.
Right.
So that's the second reason they put on these exclusions. But there's one other reason on there too. There's some exclusions that are on there because they are specifically covered under other policies that you can buy. So you have things that are, for instance, I think we talked about this also before, cyber liability.
Right.
Okay.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, go ahead.
You can have a website that is a billboard type website that just tells your customers, you know, what your services are, what products you have to sell. And in that case, it's on there where it's just it's presented, it's a billboard, it's an advertising. It's not interactive, so it doesn't have a lot of exposure. Now, let's go one step further. Let's say you capture your client's name, address, phone numbers, driver's license number, social security number, credit card numbers. The federal laws that have given us so much penalties if we are hacked, you cannot afford not to have the cyber liability anymore. Now, I'm not saying the billboard, if you have a website that's simply like a billboard, shouldn't have it, because there are still companies out there that search the web for opportunities to help pay their bills. You know, not, you know, I know big companies out there that have an office probably this large that have people sitting just looking at the websites. And I'll give you an example.
Oh, please.
I have a storefront that's on the main road, and there's a McDonald's sign past my store, and I take a picture of my place of business and put it on my website, but the golden arches are in the frame. Now, did I get permission from McDonald's to
have the golden arches
sign
on
off
your
that
website?
that's okay?
Sure, sure.
If not, can they come back at me and sue me?
Yeah.
You better believe it.
Yeah, yeah.
So even that kind of website, there's still a need for coverage. Plagiarism, things like that, you still come to play.
Right, and you know, somebody mentioned to me the other day that we're such a litigious society, and you know, I responded that not only that, but we also have a society where everybody wants to sue everybody. Right. So you know, a little humor there. Anyway, so Tom, let's talk about the back end for just a couple more minutes. And let's say somebody does have a claim. Is that another area where they need expert help, or can anybody kind of pretty much present a claim?
Anybody can present a claim. And unfortunately, you and I know that you can go on the website now, and you don't even need an agent in some cases, and you sign up for this insurance. Without mentioning names, there's a number of them out there, and you don't really have an agent, and they give you a number to call. And I'll go one step further. Even insurance companies that brokers use routinely are now trying to have call centers where you bypass the broker and just call in. Well, I feel sorry for those people because so many times the non-educated in insurance jargon will present a claim over the phone in such a way that precludes their coverage. Water can be very difficult. Damages that come through your roof. There's a lot of ways in which things can not be covered under the policy language. And you're calling direct, maybe using the wrong terminology, and they're saying no to your claims. My advice to people is to use a broker, to go to that broker, tell them first what has happened. Let the broker, if he can, go to the company and report the claim. If the broker is not allowed to do that, and some companies do require the customer or client, I prefer to use the word client because I'm advising my people.
Right.
The client should be schooled on how to present the claim properly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll give you a story too. And this applies to commercial as well as to personal lines. And to give a better example, I'm going to give you something that happens a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And this happened to my daughter, in fact, about 2 months ago. And she had just cashed a check for $2,000. She had a couple payroll checks that she had held on to. She cashed them, and she was going to buy something. So she had $2,000 of cash, which nowadays is not a good idea anyway. But $2,000 cash, a purse can be how much? It can
a few
be
hundred to a lot more.
Well, your wife is better for you than my wife is.
Right.
Let's use an average price of $300, and that's probably low. Then you have all the little things that are in your purse and everything else. I'm going to assume that with everything and the credit cards and the getting new license,
Right.
maybe a passport, all that combined, let's say that's $1,000. Okay? And we know we had a $2,000 cash loss as well. Now, my suggestion, if you call up and you have a $1,000 deductible, the adjuster is going to say, well, you have a $1,000 deductible and we'll give you up to $200 because there's a limitation on the policy for cash. So that $2,000, I'm sorry to say, you're out the money. Okay. Well, a knowledgeable broker is going to say, no, wait a second. When you call in your claim, I want you to tell them about the cash loss first. And you want your deductible subtracted from the cash. So if you have a $2,000 cash loss and they say take the $1,000 away from the cash, you still are going to get the $200 because there's a limitation on the policy.
Right.
But now your deductible is gone. And if you had called and just said that I have $1,000 worth of purse and things in the purse and the cash loss, the deduction for the deductible is going to be made on $1,200 and you're going to get $200.
Yeah.
A broker or somebody that's savvy is going to get you $1,200
Right.
for the same loss.
Interesting.
And you can do that on a commercial policy as well because there's all kinds of restrictions on artwork. There's restrictions on fencing, coverage away from the premises where somebody might have taken something out of a car or a truck. You use your deductible on what's limited, not on the whole loss.
Sure. Good.
And people don't know how to do that.
Yep.
You know, there is one more thing, because we kind of jumped around.
Yeah.
I went from the package policy to the workman's comp to the cyber liability policy. Now, I want to mention one more policy, and there's innumerable other coverages.
Sure.
But I find this very important nowadays. And that is covering yourself for employment practices liability. Now, yes, I'm talking about discrimination or sexual harassment, things of this nature that are, and there's other coverages that are part of that policy that cover my interaction with my employees or managers with employees or employee on employee. But that policy can also be covering my exposure to going to my clients. Now that's considered third-party liability.
Yeah. Okay.
But that can be a part of that employment practices liability policy. Nowadays, in too many cases, I'm finding, for instance, a doctor who has a patient, a male doctor, female patient. The female patient is not paying their bill. and the doctor calls or his staff calls and they say, we're looking for payment on this. And she says, I'm not paying you anything. And the person says, why? Or the doctor says, why? Because while we were alone, you touched me improperly.
Mm.
Now, the doctor, without that coverage, is going to be looking at, well, I'm going to lose my reputation. I'm going to have to protect myself in court. The average price, I'm told, on that kind of claim is $25,000 to $50,000 just in defense costs. And without a policy, I'm going to be subject to that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's no longer worth it not to have that coverage, or to at least think long and hard about adding that to the amount of coverages that I have.
Right, right. Well, I think that just confirms that the world has gotten pretty complicated. And we're about at the end of our time, but let me just say this about Tom. I've known him for probably at least 10 years, and he not only is extremely knowledgeable about this, but he really loves getting into it. So if you want to take a look at your coverages and make sure you're protecting yourself, Tom is a good guy to talk to. And Tom, how can they reach you?
I tell my clients there's a lot of times when they're going to be after hours. When you're in business for yourself, you're always thinking about business. And I accept calls from 9 to 9, 7 days a week. I've never found that clients misuse that. And that number to reach me is 708-254-8100. So that's 708-254-8100. And I'm licensed in innumerable states, and I do international coverages as well.
Super. Thank you, Tom. And if you need me, if you have any business issues you'd like to discuss, or you need improv comedy programs, give me a call, 630-272-3895.